Prince Harry's response did not arrive with theatrics or provocation. There was no spectacle, no attempt to dominate the news cycle, no performance of outrage. Instead, it was measured, deliberate, and rooted in something increasingly rare in public discourse: lived experience. His words were calm, but they were firm. And that firmness mattered, because what was at stake was not political point scoring, but historical truth and human cost. When comments surfaced questioning the role of NATO forces in Afghanistan, the discussion quickly slid into abstraction. Numbers became negotiable. Contributions were blurred, Allied service was reduced to background noise. Harry stepped in not as a pundit, not as a royal figurehead, but as a veteran who served, deployed, and lost friends in that conflict. His response did one essential thing. It brought the conversation back to reality. Harry reminded the public of a basic but crucial fact. In 2001, after the September 11 attacks, NATO invoked Article 5 for the first time in its history. That clause obliges member states to treat an attack on one as an attack on all. It was not symbolic, it was operational. Britain answered that call alongside dozens of other allies. This was not a unilateral American war with optional assistance. It was a collective military response carried by shared obligation. The United Kingdom's contribution was substantial and costly. 457 British service personnel lost their lives in Afghanistan. Thousands more returned home with life-altering injuries. Many came back carrying invisible wounds that would take years, sometimes decades, to fully surface. Those numbers are not talking points. They are lives. They are families permanently reshaped by loss. Harry's own service places him firmly within that history. He spent 10 years in the British Army, training as an officer and deploying twice to Afghanistan. His first tour was conducted under strict secrecy precisely because of the risks his presence posed to those around him. His second deployment saw him return as an Apache helicopter co-pilot and gunner in Helmand Province, one of the most dangerous regions during the conflict. These were not ceremonial postings. They were operational roles. He lived on base. He flew missions. He was part of a unit. And like so many who served, he formed deep bonds under conditions that civilians rarely experience. Friendships forged in war do not fade easily, nor does the loss when those friends do not come home. That is why his response carried weight. He spoke of friends lost, but also of the families left behind. Parents who buried children, partners who raised families alone, children who grew up without one parent, often with only fragments of memory. For many of these families, the end of combat operations did not bring closure. It brought a quieter, lonelier chapter of grief and adjustment. Harry did not ask for praise. He did not center himself. He did not argue that his service made him exceptional. He simply asked for accuracy. He asked that when political rhetoric touches on war, it does so with respect for the truth and for those who paid its price. That distinction matters because misinformation in this context is not harmless. It erases contribution, it diminishes sacrifice, and it compounds injury for those still carrying the weight of that experience. The media response revealed just how differently the same set of facts can be framed. Left-leaning outlets largely treated the issue as a matter of record. Their reporting focused on the inaccuracy of the original claims about NATO's role and highlighted the anger and hurt felt by veterans and military families. The emphasis stayed on facts, alliances, and the emotional impact on those who served. Right-leaning outlets often chose a different approach. Headlines leaned on charged language, portraying Harry as emotional, combative, or provocative. Some stories foregrounded his personal identity while softening or paraphrasing the original remarks that triggered the backlash. That shift subtly reframed the issue. What should have been a discussion about military honor and Allied sacrifice became instead a story about personality and perceived motive. Centrist coverage occupied an uneasy middle ground. Reports labelled the remarks controversial or minimizing, then paired them with political reaction, including condemnation from senior figures. In doing so, they treated the issue as a clash of opinions rather than a correction of fact. Across the spectrum, word choice did heavy lifting. Whether this moment was understood as a factual intervention, a political dispute, or a celebrity controversy depended almost entirely on framing. What makes Harry's intervention significant is precisely what it refuses to be. It does not rely on ceremony. It does not lean on titles or institutional authority. He did not speak as a prince or trade on royal legitimacy. He spoke as someone who served and who continues to work directly with veterans through the Invictus Games Foundation. That consistency matters. Since its founding, Invictus has focused on recovery, resilience, and rehabilitation for wounded, injured, and sick service personnel. It is not about spectacle. It is about long-term support. Harry's relationship with the veteran community is not occasional or performative. It is ongoing. It is built through presence, listening, and action. That clarity throws institutional silence into sharp relief. Senior royals frequently appear in uniform at remembrance events. They lay wreaths. They attend ceremonies. They speak about service in abstract terms. Yet when Allied troops were publicly diminished, there was no comparable response. No public defence, no correction, no acknowledgement of the insult felt by those who served. Silence in moments like this is not neutral. It communicates priorities. When institutions that regularly invoke military sacrifice choose not to defend it, the absence is felt. The contrast between ritual and responsibility becomes difficult to ignore. The political response further illustrated this divide. Keir Starmer described the remarks as insulting and appalling and called for an apology. His response was sharp, immediate, and rooted in domestic political positioning. Harry chose a different register entirely. He did not escalate. He did not personalize the dispute. He did not respond to individuals. He kept his focus exactly where he believed it belonged, on the dead, the injured, and the families who continue to live with the consequences of war. That difference in tone is instructive. One approach treats the issue as a political affront. The other treats it as a moral obligation to correct the record. In doing so, Harry demonstrated a form of authority that does not derive from office or rank, but from experience and accountability. This moment also sits within a broader pattern now shaping Western alliances. Recent years have shown how easily smaller partners and affected communities can be sidelined when power concentrates at the top. Decisions are made quickly, narratives are simplified. Contributions that do not fit the preferred story are quietly minimized. In that climate, reminders of shared obligation are not nostalgic. They are necessary. NATO's credibility rests on the understanding that commitments are mutual. That when Article 5 is invoked, it binds not just militaries, but memories. Those who answered the call cannot be treated as expendable once the headlines move on. The reaction to Donald Trump's remarks exposed just how fragile that trust can be. Allies who fought and bled alongside the United States heard their role reduced to a footnote. Veterans and families heard something else entirely, that their sacrifice could be rewritten, reframed, or forgotten, depending on political convenience. Institutions that regularly trade in symbols of service largely stayed quiet. That silence was noticed, and for many, it deepened a sense of disconnection between those who make decisions and those who live with their consequences. Harry's response cut through that fog by returning to fundamentals. He spoke about duty fulfilled. He spoke about lives lost. He spoke about families still carrying the burden years after the last troops came home. He did not argue for policy. He argued for respect. That distinction matters because respect is the foundation on which alliances are built. Without it, treaties become transactional, commitments become conditional, and those who serve become invisible once their utility expires. By grounding his words in record and consequence, Harry reminded the public that wars do not end when politicians move on. They end, if they ever do, in the bodies, minds and homes of those who served. Accuracy is not pedantry in that context. It is a form of care. This is why his intervention resonated so strongly with veterans and their families. It did not feel like advocacy from above. It felt like recognition from within. Someone who understood the cost, who had paid part of it himself, and who refused to let it be casually dismissed. In an era saturated with outrage and performance, that restraint stood out. Harry did not seek to dominate the narrative. He corrected it. He did not inflame. He clarified. And in doing so, he offered a reminder that alliances endure not through ceremony, leverage or rhetoric, but through honesty and respect for those who bore the cost when words became war. That is not a political statement, it is a human one. And for many watching, it was long overdue.